Welcome back to Sunken Media, folks. This is the second in our series re-examining horror movie death scenes that I saw as a child. With today's pick, I had to look out an old nightlight just to sleep that night, even though I was 12, maybe even 13 when I saw this scene. This is the second of the kills that got me into horror.
Ow!
Alright, so after my slightly cheesy first pick, I do feel the need to redeem myself. We're going with a classic.
Drumroll, please.
The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was nearly 20 years old when I first saw it, and I feel like now, even 30 years later, it is still deeply unsettling and nightmarish. But there is one scene in particular that sticks with me, because it is both sickly gorgeous and it still gets my heart racing. This scene also has what is maybe my favorite shot in all of horror history. I know that's a bold statement, but we'll get to that in just a bit. Now, if you somehow missed this iconic film, this I absolutely recommend that you see. I can't imagine if you were into horror that you haven't, but obviously there will be some spoilers ahead. And in fact, today's scene is going to be a little twofer. We've got double the victim count. It is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre's combined death sequence of Kurt and Pam. So this was the last scene to truly terrify me during my childhood years, before I became a teenager and really started watching horror full time. We happened to go into our little local mom and pop video store where they had one of those fat back TVs in the middle of the store with a VCR on it that just sort of constantly played something. That afternoon, they decided to play Terror in the Aisle, which for those of you who don't know is a 1980s documentary kind of. It was just a compilation of the best horror kills.
If you have a need to be terrified.
Hosted by Donald Pleasance.
You're being programmed to go nuts.
And Nancy Allen.
That's because a terror film is a lot like a roller coaster ride.
So still relatively new to hardcore horror at this point. I'd gotten into creature features a little bit, but I stood there in the middle of the afternoon, in the middle of this video store, being completely traumatized when this scene came on. So two of the teens, Kurt and Pam, have decided to go down to the old watering hole to have a swim. They get there, they find that it's completely dried out.
This must be it.
And then Kurt notices a farmhouse in the distance and a windmill. I love this shot. The glare on this is beautiful. There's a real sense of unease. And the movie takes that angle a lot. It puts you really low, oftentimes putting stuff in the foreground, and it makes you feel like you are forced to be in the muck and the grime of this movie. There's this weird kind of artwork that's clearly made from perhaps old victims' property. And then they stumble onto this garage kind of area where there are a bunch of old abandoned cars from various periods of history. And there's some really nice movements in this scene with the camera work. And there's just this building sense of the fact that something is not right about this particular farm. And one thing to note that is true of the entire film, there's no traditional soundtrack, there's no music. It is just hearing the sound of this generator and various metallic sounds that are sort of dropped in sporadically. So they decide to continue on, even despite all of these kind of weird clues that they're seeing. Because there is a generator, they're thinking someone in the house may have some gas. And we see all these symbols of rural America, the barbed wire fences and the white farmhouses and the swing out front, and it sort of lulls you. It's just a sunny afternoon.
Hello, is anybody home?
And perhaps one final clue to make them turn around and leave, they find a human tooth on the porch.
Got something for you.
And this scared me as a kid, the idea of other people's homes. And I can remember going trick-or-treating and seeing into their houses and smelling the way their houses smelled and just going into strangers' houses in general. It felt very creepy and very alien to me. And as a kid, it always gave me this sense of unease.
Hey, Pam, come look at this.
Let's go!
And then for the house to be so dark and foreboding as this, it just really creeped me out as a kid.
Hey, Pam.
Ugh, the sounds.
Hello?
And the reveal of the big baddie absolutely terrified me. The idea that the first blow didn't kill him, which is sort of a callback to a line earlier in the movie when they're talking about slaughtering cows. And the sound of the second blow. Ugh. That sound when he slams the door, for many years after that, any closed door could possibly have Leatherface behind it in my mind.
Kirk?
And then this shot. This shot is almost sheer perfection. This, again, may be my favorite shot in all of horror. The smooth transition as it follows her underneath the swing, and we see the house kind of slowly getting bigger and bigger and looming over her and consuming the sky with all of the kind of evil that is in that house. Seeing her from the back, mostly flesh, with these kind of very gory colored shorts on, it just kind of... There's this whole implication of like the human body being simply flesh. And then she goes into the house, and this is like one of those times. I know she was looking for her boyfriend and all that, but like as a child, everything within me was screaming, do not do that. And then she just keeps going deeper and deeper and into these darker and darker corners of the house. So then she kind of stumbles into this complete hellscape, and she is literally like wrist deep in this stuff. And it slowly reveals then that these skeletons have been used for sort of art and for furniture. The fact that the human body could be so thoroughly torn apart and just seen as material, and the almost nonsensical way in which it's used, it doesn't serve a purpose. It's art. It's an aesthetic. It is a hobby that this family has chosen to undertake. And when she starts screaming, everything within me was like, shh, be quiet. He's going to hear you. And then you get the sense of her being in flip-flops and needing to get out of there, and that really kind of impeding her movement. Oh, and that shot. Oh, God. Oh. The flip-flops go flying, and then once he picks her up, there's nothing she can do. He's got her. It's funny, I watched this with my partner, and he pointed out how genuinely happy Leatherface seemed to be when he caught her, and I thought that was funny. It makes sense. He essentially caught dinner, or at least got some supplies for the family barbecue joint. And little actor choices like this last minute try to run for the door once he puts her down, the actor kind of understanding what they would be doing in that particular horrific situation. And the reveal of his iconic weapon for the very first time. And in some ways, it's surprising how little blood is used in the scene when dealing with the subject matter that we're actually dealing with. And the idea that she has to then sit and watch this happen to her boyfriend and know what's probably coming for her next. And then this final shot of the sequence, which I think ties it right back to the very first time that Kurt laid eyes on that house. The windmill was the thing kind of front and center. It just really showed how quickly that afternoon changed for them. In a matter of minutes, their lives were over. I just think it's an amazing way to end that sequence. So a couple things that I think really touched nerves for me in terms of that scene. And this is kind of something that I talked about with the last film, Jaws: The Revenge. And it's kind of a theme that I'm noticing as I'm putting this whole series together. There is kind of this anti-horror setting, Americana and all the stuff that is supposed to be kind of comforting, homesteady, all that kind of stuff, and it changes all that. And I think that's where a lot of horror, especially for me when I was young, became chilling, because I didn't know what to trust or what was really safe or what wasn't, because this kind of pointed out that a lot of stuff that you may see as safe or think is innocuous isn't. It takes where we get our food and it makes it really grimy and gross and questionable. Frankly, that the movie looks like it would smell. And again, this is a farmhouse. These are people who handle meat. This is where we're supposed to be getting our nutrients from. That kind of perversion is stomach churning. And kind of by extension, that sort of just the disembowelment and cannibalism and the sort of the correlations that this movie makes between slaughterhouses and cows and livestock and humans. It just kind of reminds you that someone might not just kill you, but could completely consume you, or that you could possibly be consuming someone else at some point. That's pretty vile to think about. Leatherface has probably always been my favorite iconic slasher villain, but I think in this particular scene, not having seen or experienced Leatherface before, one of the things that really sticks out is he's not only masked, he's masked with a very humanoid kind of face. It's a mask made out of human skin. The mouth of the mask and the way that it hits him, it creates this really weird, uncanny valley. It's a particularly effective look. What may have given me the most reason for nightmares that night was this was perhaps the first time that I saw a truly human villain. There was nothing paranormal about him. He wasn't a giant shark. This was just a crazy guy who had a method and a pattern and the means and the infrastructure set up to do these awful, awful things that probably had never even occurred to my young mind one person could do to another person. And the idea that the villain was one of those human creatures that I meet every day, that is deeply unnerving to a kid. There's no way to separate yourself from that the way you could say, well, a giant shark's not going to come get me. So yeah, this one really rattled my cage, I would say. Again, I waited a couple years before I actually saw the whole movie, but it quickly became a favorite. I had the poster up in my room for most of my teenage years. I have an autographed picture from Gunnar Hansen that says "You're Next" that I was always very proud of. And of all the classic slasher icons from that 70s, 80s period, Leatherface was always by far my favorite. And I think some of that is, I think Leatherface is a bit more complex in some ways and perhaps a bit more sympathetic. Leatherface was a character that brought up more questions than answered, and I think that was creepy for me. By extension, Texas Chainsaw Massacre always seemed a bit darker and in some ways a bit more dangerous than like Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th. And I think it is a true masterpiece of nightmare horror. All right, so that should do it for this one. Let me know in the comments below which horror villain is your absolute favorite. As always, if you love talking horror, please like and subscribe. Until next time, be you, be safe, be kind.
Be nice.
And I will catch you folks on the next Sunken Media.
And we're going to be here when the dust settles, I guarantee you.